Hi guys, I hope you're doing great. So this is a new video series where we'll be building a bookstore management system using Golang. So we'll be building some CRUD APIs and these are beginner friendly. The only thing here is that things are going to get a little serious in this series. I mean, I hope you've seen my Golang CRUD video, which is on my channel. You can go and check it out. I hope you've seen my Golang to do CRUD videos. But in this video, things will get a little serious because firstly, we'll be using a database. So earlier in the CRUD video, we didn't use a database, but here we'll be using MySQL database. We'll be using the GORM package to interact with our database, and then we look at JSON marshalling and unmarshalling. And the biggest change here is that we'll have a proper project structure. In the sense, we won't be writing all of our code in main.go file. We'll have a proper project structure, which I'll explain to you shortly. And then we'll be using Gorilla Mux for routing. This I think you've already seen how in the Golang CRUD video, right? So it is beginner friendly, but like I said, things will get a bit serious because of the project structure. In the sense, you'll have to work with routing. And so in the previous videos, I had mentioned that I'll be showing you a video with using the database and how to have a project structure. And then people started saying for those videos that when is this video coming out with the database and with the project structure. So I thought why not create this video right now. So with project structure, this is what we're going to do. We're going to have two main folders in our project. One will be the CMD folder, the other will be the package folder. The CMD folder will only have the main.go file, and the package folder will have the config folder, controllers folder, models folder, routes folder, and utils folder. So we'll have five different folders inside the package folder, right? Inside config, we'll have app.go file, which will help us to connect with our database. In the controllers, we'll have book controllers, which will have the functions that will help us to process the data that we'll get as response, and also the request that we'll get from the user and the response that we need to send. So we'll process all of that in the book controller. In the book models, in the models folder, we'll have book.go file, which will help us to create those structs and models that will be used by our database. In the routes, as you know, we'll just write our routes, and which I'll get into later on in just 2 minutes. I'll show you what the routes are. And in the utils, we'll just have some code for marshalling and unmarshalling JSON from our response and our request, right? And then these are the routes that we'll have. So we'll have /book/route twice. One will be for post and one will be for get. And these are our controller functions that I've mentioned here. So if you post on the /book route, sorry, I think this needs to change. This will actually be get, and this will be post. All right. So if you get on our /book route, we'll call the get books controller function. If you post, use the post method on our /book route, we'll create a book, right? We'll have to send something in the body, and we'll have to use our JSON marshalling and unmarshalling to get the data here to the database. And then if we do get on /book ID, which we'll pass the book ID, so we'll get the book by ID. So we'll have to create function to get a book by ID. Then we'll have our put method for updating the book, right? And on the same route, /book ID. And then we'll have our delete method on /book/ID route, which will give us the delete book the function in controller functions. So that's our entire introduction on what we're going to build and how we're going to build it. The next steps include where I'll go to my Ubuntu terminal. I'll start these different folders. I'll create this complete project structure, and then we'll open our VS Code. We'll start creating these folders and these files, and then we'll start writing all of that, right? And before that, in our Ubuntu, we'll also have to install the packages that we'll be using. So in many of the videos that you'll see on YouTube, you might see people first including those packages in their files while they're coding, and then they'll use go mod tidy or something like that to install the package that they've used. But in our case, what we'll do is we'll install those packages beforehand, and then we'll include them in our code. It's just something that I prefer, and I also recommend you also do that. So that's the introduction, and let's get started. So as you can see, I've opened up my terminal. Since I'm on Ubuntu, this is a terminal. If you are on Windows, it'll be a PowerShell, and if you are on Mac, it'll be a terminal again. The commands will be the same. It doesn't have to, the commands won't change. So I'm going to go ahead and go inside the folder where I write all my Go code, where all my Go programs reside. You can do the same. And I'm going to go ahead and create a directory for the new project, and it will be called Go Bookstore in my case. And I'm going to go ahead and cd inside the Go Bookstore. And now since we are here, we'll have to install a couple of packages, right? So before we install packages, we'll have to create a go.mod file which will store all the packages. It's almost like the package.json file if you are from a Node.js background, right? So it contains all our packages that we'll be using in this project. So we'll first do go mod init, and even if you're not storing right now inside a GitHub account, I just recommend you use github.com and / your name or any other name, and then / the name of the project, which is bookstore. This gives us like a relative route or an absolute route based on which we can, include and import different files into our main.go file. So it has created our go.mod file. Okay, and now we'll start importing the packages that we need. So the first package that I need is the gorm package, which will help me to interact with my database. Jinzu / gorm. So Jinzu is the name of the guy, I think, who's created gorm. So we have added gorm, and now more specifically I need the MySQL package inside gorm, because gorm is an ORM, right? It helps for Golang, and it helps you to interact with SQLite and Postgres. But for this example, we need MySQL, so we're going to go ahead and install that. And then we need to install the Gorilla Mux package, since we need to use that for our routes. So I'm going to say go get github.com /gorilla /mux. So we have installed Gorilla Mux as well. Now, as per my knowledge, these are the 3 packages that we will require, but as we go along, I might find that we need more packages. So it's not a problem. We'll install them as we go ahead. So from what I see, what we'll be building right now, I think these 3 should be enough probably. So let's get started with the actual code now that we have our packages in our Go mod file. Go mod file also helps us to go build, which will create the build or the exe file which we will execute on our machine. Exe if you have Windows, and .deb if you have basically it's a binary file if you have Ubuntu. And so we're going to go ahead and open up our VS Code editor. So I'll say code and space dot, and that will open up my code editor. So as you can see, I'm inside my VS Code window, and now I'll start creating the folders that we had seen in the diagram. And you may have noticed that there's a time delay between when I switch between my Google Chrome and my VS Code and my PowerShell or my terminal. And that's because I'm using OBS to record these videos, and it's not very user friendly in terms of helping you switch between the tabs very easily. So kindly bear with me. So let's start creating the folders quickly. As I'd shown you in the diagram, we have a CMD folder and we have a PKG folder, right? These are the 2 main folders. Inside our CMD folder, we'll have a main folder, and inside the main folder, we'll have our main.go file where all the magic will happen, right? The main controller, the main control of our entire project. And then inside the package folder, we have config, and we have our controllers. Then we have, so I think by mistake what I've done is I've created controllers inside config. So I have controllers, and then I have models, and then I have routes and utils, right? Routes and utils. So as you'd seen just a second back, that I had created controllers inside config by mistake. That's a very common mistake, by the way, and that will happen to you if you're not very careful. So please make sure that inside your package folder, all of these different folders are at the same level inside the package folder, right? They're not inside one another. Yeah, that's a very common mistake, by the way. So let's start creating our files. Inside config, we have app.go. Inside our controller, by the way, in the diagram, I'd already shown you the name of the files as well. So we have controller.go, book controller.go, and then inside models we have our book.go file, and inside our routes we'll have bookstore routes.go. okay, and inside our utils, the name of the file will just be utils.go. Now, there's so many files right here, so we need a strategy on where to begin and where to end the program at. So how do we start coding? How do we begin this whole journey of writing so much code, right? It can be confusing, it can be daunting, it can be overwhelming many times. So that's why I have a small strategy for you that will help you understand everything really well. What I'll do is I'll start with the routes. So I'll create the routes first, and that will help you visualize the routes where the users will hit, from their front end or from their postman. The user will hit on those routes, right? So we'll start with the routes, and then what we'll do is we'll then write our app.go file, which will help us to connect with our MySQL database. Then we'll create our utils file. So app.go, which is the config file, and utils files are very small files, so they won't confuse you too much. And the routes file is also very small. And then we'll create our main.go file. The main.go file, all it will do is it will just tell Golang that here in bookstore.routes is where all my routes reside. So all these files will be really small. Then we'll create our models file, which will be slightly bigger, and then our book controller will have a lot of code. So we'll tackle it at the end, because after the routes, the control will go to each of the functions in book controller file. So this is the book controller is what we'll tackle at the end, and before that you'll get a little bit of an idea of what we're building, so things won't be very confusing for you. That's what I'm at least attempting to do. So as you can see, I've started coding here. I've written package routes, and then I've started importing the packages that I'll be needing. Since this is my routes file, the one package that I most definitely need is Gorilla Mux, which will help me to create the routes in the first place. And the other package that I need is not really a package, but I need my controller file here. So first just see what this is, then I'll try to explain to you what's happening. So I'll say akhil/go bookstore /pkg and /controllers. So this will help me import my controllers folder, and in turn the file inside the controllers folder as well, right? Now, if you're from a Node.js background, you will be very confused when you look at this, right? So this is an absolute path, whereas with Node.js, you're used to something like this, right? So you'll say controllers, and that's because routes and controllers are both in the same package called pkg. So you would say that, okay, I just want to import controllers, so I'll just say like this, right? But that's not how it works with Golang. Golang has absolute paths, and once you get used to Golang, you'll understand that that's kind of the right, even if it looks lengthy, but that's kind of the right way to do things, right? Because the github.com/akhil/go bookstore till here is the path that we created, which was like the absolute path that we created for our project when we were initiating the Go mod file, if you remember. And package.controllers is where we'll come inside package, and then we'll come inside controllers is where the controllers file lies, and that's what we want to use. So it may take you a while to get used to this absolute routing, but once you get used to it, I'm telling you, you won't go back. So I'm a Node.js developer. I was a Node.js developer, I can say, for a very long time, but once I started using Golang, I can tell you there is no going back, right? Because Golang is so much better. So you have register bookstore. So I want to create a function called register bookstore routes, and this function will have basically all my routes, and the routes will help me to get the control to my controller, which is where I'll have the meat of the logic. So I'll have router mux.router, right? And here is where, in this function is where I'll create my handlers. So router.handle func, right? So if somebody comes to my /book/, right, so I'll say controllers.create book. So I'd shown you the create book function, right, in the diagram. I've not written the function till now, but I'll be writing this function in the controllers file, and this is why I needed my controllers package on top, controllers file on top, right? Because if somebody hits the book route, I want my controllers.createBook function to handle it, and the method is going to be post here, because I'm trying to create a new book. So I'm sure that's very clear. And then we'll create another handle func, and it will again be /book/, but this time I want it to say get book. It'll get the list of all books for me, and the method in this case, as you know, will be get. So on top, by mistake, I had put 2h for methods. I removed one of those, so just make sure you don't make any typos or any spelling mistakes. Then we have another handle func, where we will handle, as you had seen in the diagram before the this coding part started, we'll have /book, and inside this we'll have our book ID, right? And then you have controllers dot get book by ID, right? So that's the function. I want to get one book by ID, and dot methods, the method would be get in this case. All right, so I think all clear till now. Now we want to create the two more routes. They will be same, /book and /book ID will be there, but they will be our put and delete functions, right? So I'll say router dot handle func, sorry, and here also I think the U is capital, it should be a small u, and then you have /book/book ID, and then we'll say inside my controllers file I'll have a function called update book. Okay, and then the method for this will be put, and similarly for our delete route as well, book/book ID, and we'll have controllers dot delete book dot methods, and we'll have the delete method here, right? So far all looks great, right? Everything is working out pretty fine for now. So we have written our routes package. So if you've reached this far, then you should be proud of yourself, I think. So now, like I promised you, we'll write the app.go file, which is inside the config folder, right? And so we'll come here and we'll give it the name config, sorry, it's not capital, package config. All right, and here I want to import just two of my packages, and they will both be related to talking to MySQL. So the first package will be jinzu/gorm, which is my ORM, and the second package will be the more specific one, which is github.com/jinzu/gorm/dialects/MySQL. So if you go and look at the documentation for the gorm package, you will notice this blank character here, and then space, and then the link, right? So just make sure you do that as well. So once we have imported these two packages, the MySQL package and the gorm package, now is the time to create a variable called db. So the whole point of this file will be to return a variable called db, which will help the other files to interact with the db, right? So we'll say *gorm.db, and then we'll create a connect function. The connect function helps us to open a connection with our database, and the database in this case, as you know, is MySQL database, right? So we'll have d, err. If there isn't, so I'll write some statement here, and then if there's an error, the error will come inside err. If there's no error and the database connection has opened, it will come inside d, right? So I'll be able to access the connection using d. So I'll say gorm.open, which will help me open up my connection with the database, right? And here I'll write something. So I'll say the name of the database that I want to use, MySQL, because Gorm helps me, as I had said, talk to SQLite and Postgres as well. But in my case, I want to use MySQL. And here I'll say the name of the user and my password and my the name of my table, simple rest, and then we'll write some little lines here which are required by MySQL. So if there is an error, right, which means that if error not equal to null, which means that if there is an error, so we'll say panic err, and here we'll say db is equal to d, right? So whatever was in d here that we received, we'll transfer that to now db variable, and we'll have a get db function which we'll use in other files, and it just returns db. So like I said, the purpose of this file is to return a db variable that will help us to talk to the database. Other files can talk to database easily. Now as you can see, I have not written some code ahead of this part, right? So for MySQL to connect, we have to write some things after my username, my password, and the name of the table. So that needs to be char set is equal to utf-8. Just make sure you copy this exactly, and you have parse time is equal to true. So this is some requirement by MySQL, right? So you have location is equal to local, right? So these few lines you have to write, and then your app.go file is complete. Now the next code that we'll be writing will be our utils.go file. So when we start writing our book controller, we will be using we'll need data that is unmarshaled data. So we'll receive some request from the user, right? And it will be in JSON, but we'll need to unmarshal it to be able to use it in our controller. So we just need to write one very small code here to be able to unmarshal the JSON that we'll receive from the request. So it's going to be very simple. We're going to call it utils, package utils, and we'll import a couple of packages. One is called encoding/JSON, right? The other is called io/ioutil, and the third is called net/http, right? And here is where I'll create my function, and the function is called parse body. That will help me to parse the body, especially in the create function, in the sense when I'm trying to create a book, in the create book function in my controllers, I will receive some body in the request, right? So I need to parse that body because that body will be in JSON, so I need to be able to unmarshal it. So I'm just creating one small function to do that, right? So I get the request and a pointer to it, and I take that in R, so I'll be able to use R to access the request that I've received from the user. And I'm sure you know what a request is. Request has that body that we are sending of the book, right? And then you have X, and you have interface. So I'm sure you know basics of how interfaces work. So we'll say body and error is equal to ioutil.read all we're doing is just reading the body, right? And if there is no error, so error double equal to nil, then we'll say error is equal to JSON dot, then we'll start unmarshalling it. Basically unmarshal, there's a single L, right? And we'll say byte and body, comma, after body you say comma X. So just one thing, guys, the X is a small x, not a capital X. By mistake I had written here capital X, so just make sure of that. And then error not equal to nil, and then we'll just return, right? So even this looks like it's complete, right? And so your utils file is complete, and your bookstore routes file is complete. Now we want to start concentrating on our app.go file. Yeah, sorry, the app.go file is also complete. So now we want to start concentrating on our models file, right, which is slightly more advanced. So, but let's start anyways, right? So we have package models, we'll call it, and then we're going to import, as you know, we'll import our gorm package first, github.com/jinzu/gorm. And there's one more thing that we need to install or import, and that will be my config file that I just created, right? Because the config file helps me to connect with my database, so I need that here. So I'll say github.com/go bookstore/pkg and /config, right? So let me just be sure that, yeah, so the routes required controllers, and the app.go file required gorm, and the models required config. Yeah, so I think, yeah, so we're on the right track. So we'll create a database, the variable called db, gorm.db. You've seen this already in the config file. And we'll create a struct called book. Now structs basically are based on models, and a model is something that, you know, gives us a structure to help us store something in the database. So in this case we'll have name, because every single book will have a name, right? And then you put these two backticks. Inside that you say gorm, then you say JSON name, then you say author, and you say string again, so name of type string and author of type string, and then you say gorm, sorry, you'll say JSON, and you'll say here author, okay, and then you'll say publication and string, backticks again, JSON again, and publication. So let me read through it and make sure everything is fine. Gorm, JSON, all right, author and publication, right? Name, author and publication. So we have three things. And so usually almost always you'll find this, that we have to whenever we are working with databases, we have to init our database. So if you've seen the Golang to-do list video that I've created a few days back, you must have noticed that init function. So here also we need to have an init function that will help us to initialize the database in the first place. So config.connect, this is the function that we created together just some time back, which is the connect function, which helps us to connect with the database. That's inside the config folder, you know that already. And db is equal to, so whatever we get from that config file by calling the getDB function, which we have created together just some time back, getDB function inside app.go. As you can see, this is your getDB function, which returns just the DB, which we had connected to the DB, right? And so that's what you get here inside DB. So here also you have a DB variable where you're just storing the DB that you get back from the config file, right? So till now I think everything should be highly clear, and then we'll just auto migrate it with a book, an empty book. Okay, so all good till now. Now the control first is in the routes, right here in the routes, and then the routes basically give the control to the controllers, and the controllers will give the control to the book.go, which is basically the models, right? So that's how the flow works, in the sense the user interacts with the routes, and the routes send control to the controllers, where we have all our logic, which we'll write in some time, and the controllers then have to perform some operations with the database. Now the operations with the database have to reside inside our models file, which is book.go in this case. So that means we'll have to have a different function for the different controllers that we'll create. So we need to have a create book function here. We need to have a get all books, get book by ID, and delete book. So we need to have all these different functions here, right? So now we have two options. One is that I start creating those functions directly, or I create the main.go file, and then that will give you more clarity, and then we'll create the functions that are required for database, right? So I think I'll create the main.go file so that you have a little more clarity. So let's go on main.go file, and then we'll come back to the book.go file as well. Now so we have one more option. One is that I start creating the controllers, and then once we are writing the function in the controllers, then I'll start creating the model functions. But that may confuse you, so that's why I want to create the model level functions first, which talk to the database, right? And then we'll have a corresponding function to that in the controllers. So that I feel, at least from my opinion, that will make things very easy for you. So anyways, let's write out our package main file. Inside our package main file, we'll import log, because I want to log out if there's any error. We'll have nest/http. So as I told you earlier, that in our main file, all we're going to do is we're going to create the server, right? Which will also define our local host. That's the first thing that we'll do. The second thing that we'll do is we'll tell Golang where our routers reside. So basically, all that main.go file will do is tell that bookstore.routes has our routes. So please look there, because I don't want to write all my routes in the main.go file, right? So that means I need my Gorilla Mux package here, /mux. Sorry, there's a slash here. And then I need my MySQL package here, github.com/jinzu/dialects/MySQL. And then there's something else I need here. I need to import the routes, right? So I know that the routes is inside package folder, and inside that is routes folder. So I need to again use my absolute path, which will be github.com/akhil/go bookstore/package/routes. So let me make sure if in my so here also it's correct, package/config, right? So so we have go bookstore/package/routes. So we need the routes here, like I said. And now you know that inside a main.go file you always have func main. So let's create the func main, which will basically have mux.new router. So we're creating a R variable which will initialize the router here, and we'll say routes.register bookstore routes, and we'll pass R to it. So if you remember, in our routes we have a function called as register bookstore routes. Here it is, register bookstore routes, and we are passing the router to it, R, which is the router that we just created inside main.go file. We're passing it to it, and then we are handling the functions using, as you know, controllers functions, right? So the R that we are passing here becomes router, right, which is of type mux.router. So I hope everything makes sense now. If there was a confusion earlier, then I'm sure everything is making a lot of sense now. So http.handle, R, right, and then we'll say log.fatal. So since this is a slightly big project in terms of different files and project structure, so it's very important to know what's the order in which you want to build the files, right? So if I would go in the order that's comfortable to me, then you might get confused, and so that's why I'm having to pick an order which will make a lot of sense to you, right? So you'll have listen and serve, which helps us create the server in the first place, right? And these brackets, I'll say localhost 9010 and R. So by now I'm sure you know that listen and serve is a function that helps us create a server, and we pass to it this, which is the port or the address on which we want to start the server, and it's inside the HTTP package which we have here, right? So, and if there's an error, it's going to say log, it's going to just log it out, right? So that's our main.go file. Now let's come back to our models file, which is book.go. So I'm going to start creating all the functions that I need to talk to my database. Things might look very, I won't say very, but things might look a little confusing to you right now. But when we'll finish writing our book controller file, it will make a lot of sense to you. So the routes, the data, the control goes to the controllers, like I said, and in the controllers, there will be different functions that I've shown you in the diagram that will have create book and get book by ID, get books, right? All of those functions will be there. And then those functions will again, in order to connect with the database, in order to make changes in the database, they have to go through these models, right? So we have to write these model functions, and that's what I'm creating right now out here. We can do this, like I said, after we create the controllers as well, but it may get confusing for you, so that's why I want to write these right now. So we'll have a create book function. And we have something called as a DB, right, which we have created here on top, DB. So DB is what helps us to talk to the database. So db.new record. Now new record is a function that exists inside Gorm. That's why we're using Gorm, because we don't have to write those queries for MySQL. The query part Gorm will write, which is an ORM, which helps us to talk to the database. We have to write these simple functions like create a new record, those kind of things, right? So we'll say db.create $b, right? Where B is something that we'll receive, which will be of type book, right? And what we're going to return is also of type book. So that's why we have a star here, book here. So we are going to return B of type book, right? So we receive something of type book, which is B. So we create that. And then we also return that same book that we created. So that's why we have star book out here as well. Now I want to create the get all books function. That will help me create all books, so return all the books that I have in my database. And here we'll have var books. Now I'm using a slice here because I want to return a slice or a list of the books that I have in my database, right? So we'll create a variable which is books, which is of type slice book, where B is capital. Just make sure B is capital. And then all you have to do is db.find books, and then you return books, right? So you're returning the list of books, which is slice, right? Now I want to create a function for getting a book by ID. So that means it needs to take an ID first, obviously that's very clear, which will be of int 64. There's no space between int and 64, my bad. And so these two things I've written, start book and start gom.db. Don't worry about that right now. I'll explain to you as we go along. So we have var get book of type book, okay, and db is equal to db dot where w is capital, by the way, and id equal to id. Right, so we are basically running a where command in MySQL where we are saying that where id is equal to id, right? Then find that book, find and get book. So not only are we going to just return the book that we found right now from the database, but we're also going to return the db variable as well. So that's why we have the book that we're returning, get by id, the book that we're returning with that particular id in our database, and we're also returning the db variable that we had created, which was of type gorm.db, right? And then we have a delete function, func delete book. id again is int 64, and there is book before it, var book of type book. So db dot where helps us to find the book with the id, which I've just shown you some time back, question mark comma id, right? So in get book by ID, I had taken ID where D was small. Now in this case, I'm taking ID where D is capital, and then I'll say dot delete in bracket book, and then I'm just going to return the book. So these are all the database functions I have. Now here there will be a big doubt for you. You will be wondering, why is there no update function? Why don't we have an update function? Because in this video, the way update will happen in the controller will be that we'll find the book, the ID that you will send as the from the user, that the ID that we'll receive. So we'll find that book first, and then we'll delete that particular book, and then the new data that the user has sent us to be updated. So we'll use that to update the book and create basically a new data. So we don't have an update function as such in our models. We're just going to use get and delete and then post create. Basically, we're going to use a combination of those three to update a file in our database. So it may sound confusing to you right now, but once we build our controller file, everything will make a lot of sense, right? So let's start building our controller. So we have package controllers, and then we're going to import the packages that we need. So I know that I want to use encoding/JSON package, and the other packages that I need, I'm just making sure that the video is still recording because OBS OBS has a lot of problems. And then I want to use the FMT package because I want to print out things to the console. Then I have my github.com Gorilla Mux that I want to use, .com/gorilla/mux that I want to use, right? And I want to use my net/HTTP package. I want to use string convert package, and I also want to use, now I want to import my utils and my models. So both my utils and my models are inside my package folder. So you know how to do that, right? github.com/akhil/go bookstore/pkg/utils, right? And then github.com/akhil/go bookstore/pkg/models. So I have both my utils and my models, right? Now we'll create new book, which is a variable of type models.book, right? So in our model file, which is book.go, we have created a struct of type book, right? And that's what we have been using all this while. So of type book is what we are creating here. We're creating a new book of type book, right? So model, when I say model, I'm referring to the models, sorry, with an S. I'm referring to my models file, and I'm referring to the struct inside the book, struct book call inside my models file, right? So new book is of type book, which is a struct, and which has all these different things. It has a name, an author, and publication, right? And it's called new book. I'm explaining to you this slowly because controllers is where people get confused, right? So first, so here we have our 5 functions, which is get books and create book and get book by ID and update and delete. So the strategy that we'll follow here will be that we'll create the get books function first, because that's the most easy in my from my perspective, at least. At least what I think is the get books function is the easiest, so we'll build that first. So whenever you're building a function, a controller function, you know that you have 2 things. You have a response writer and a request. For request, you put a pointer to the request that you receive from the user, and then so we have a request in R and our response in W. So whenever the response that we'll send to the user will be with W, so we'll have to return W basically. And then we'll have new books models dot get all books. Now the model functions may not have made any sense to you, but here it will make sense, because what we're trying to do here is we have new books, and in that we'll store models dot get all books. So models dot get all books is this function that we just created together, models dot get all books, right, which will just basically find all the books and send a list of the books back to the user, right? So now back in our books controller, we have a list of books inside new books, and then we want to have a response json.marshal new books. So we want to convert it into JSON, right? Whatever we receive from our database. So that's why I use the Marshal function. And then we'll use, in the header, we want to say content type, comma, pkg slash JSON w dot write header http dot status okay. Okay, so basically it will give us a 200. Status okay means it gives us a 200, and then we say w dot write, which is the main thing now, which helps us to send something to the front end or to Postman, which is the response. The response is basically a JSON version of new books that we found from the database. So we're just going to write a response, which will basically be a JSON, right? And the list of the books that we found in our database. That's all it is. And now the second easy function, in my opinion, is get book by ID. So let's create that as well. So func get book by ID w http dot response writer and comma r http dot request. All right. So we'll get access to our R, which is our request, right? So inside our request obviously will be the book ID, right? So we want to access our request and we want to access the book ID inside our request. So book ID is equal to vars and book ID. So we'll have string conversion dot parse int book ID comma 0 comma 0. So we just want to make sure that the book ID that we've received, that could be in string, right? Mostly it's a string, and we're just passing it to int using the string conversion package that we have imported here. And if there is an error not equal to nil, we'll have fmt.println error while parsing. That's what we'll return. And then we'll have book details comma the blank character, we'll say models dot get book by ID and ID, right? So we are getting get book by ID, models dot get book by ID, right? Which is a function that we created together, if you remember. Let me take you to the models file and show you. So inside the models file, inside book.go, we have get book by ID. So we'll be returning two different things, like, we'll be returning the book and we'll be returning the DB variable, right? And since I don't want to use the DB variable right now, so that's why I'm using the blank character here, because I don't want to use it. In Golang, if you don't want to use something, it's better to use the blank character, because if you define something and don't use it, Golang is going to give you a big error. So just make sure you use the blank character here, right? So so I'm going to get book by ID. I'm going to get that inside my book details variable, right? And now I want to start thinking about the response that I want to send to my user, which will be very simple. It will be just json.marshal and book details. So to my user, I have to send a JSON response, right? Because I get something from my database, I have to convert it into JSON, and then I want to send that to my user, right? So that's why I have to marshal it into JSON. So now let's start creating my header that I want to set, and it will be of type content type will be of type JSON, and w dot write header http dot status OK, and then you have your w dot write response. Okay, so I hope this is making sense till now. So inside our write header, we are sending status OK, which is 200, that everything worked fine, and we are sending the response. And inside the response, inside res, which is the response, we just have a JSON version of the book details, basically the book that we found in our database based on the ID, right? So I am sure all of that is making sense. If things are not making sense to you, then you just watch this video slower, or you just type it out with me, just code along with me. I hope you're coding along, but maybe once more you can code along, and then things will start becoming clearer to you. And if you still don't understand, then you can just put a comment in the comment box below for the video, and then I can probably help you out. So you have your response writer, comma r is your http dot request. So this is a quite long video, right? So if you've reached this far, then you should be really proud of yourself. Models dot book. Right, so utils dot parse body. Now we'll receive something from the user, right, as a request, and now we want to parse that into so we're getting that in JSON. We want to pass that into something that our database will understand. So that's why we are using parse body, which is a function that we created together inside the utils file, right? So we're going to say r comma create book. All right, and then we'll say b is equal to create book dot create book. So create book, right, is a model of type is a model inside the models you have books, right? So create book is of type that, basically. And then when we say create book dot create book, so I'm referring to the create book function here, this one, that's what I'm referring to out here. Okay, so we'll have create book dot create book, and then I now have to start thinking about my response. My response will be JSON dot Marshall inside that I pass b. So b is something that was returned to me by my create book function inside models. So let's look at what it's returning to us. So it's returning to me the same model that is same object or same record that it just created inside the database. So it created something inside the database, and it's just returning to me the same exact thing. So that's what I have access to, which is b in this case. So it's basically the same book that was sent to me by my user as a request, right? So in the response, I'm just going to convert that into JSON. So from in the beginning we received JSON, and then we parsed it into something that the database would understand. We sent it to the database. The database sent us that same record, and then that record we are converting that into JSON right now to be able to send that to our user, to Postman, basically. So we'll say w dot write header, and then we'll say http dot status OK, w dot write, and we're just going to write a response to the Postman, right? So create book was also I feel quite straightforward. Now we'll work on the delete book function. Func delete book, so which will have w http dot. So let me just check if the video is still recording. I'm not sure. Yeah, it seems like it's still recording. Anyhow, so in our delete book function, So as you are seeing right now that all of these functions are talking to another function inside our models, right? So similarly with delete book, we'll be talking to the delete book function inside our model, which is book.go. So let's have response writer and comma r, which will have a pointer to the http dot request that we'll get from the user. And then we'll use vars again to be able to access the request that we've received from the user. And now we want to access the book ID. Where's book ID, right? And then we have our error. So string convert. Basically, if you have not understood by now, this we are doing the exact same steps that we were doing in the get book by ID. So because we need to access the request, then we need to access the book ID, then we need to convert that into int, which we'll do by string convert.parseInt package, and then we'll also print out the error if there was some error, right, while parsing. So we're doing the exact same steps. There's nothing new here. Parse int and book ID comma 0 comma 0, and if there is an error, which means if error is not equal to nil, then we will say fmt dot println, and here we'll say error while parsing. All right, so that's great till now. And then we'll have book is equal to models dot delete book ID. So you know this function, right, delete book, which we have created together in the models file, delete book. It takes an ID and it just deletes the book and then returns the book that it just deleted, right? So the book that has been just returned to us will be inside the book variable. All right, now we have to start thinking about the response and how we have to send it to our user inside Postman. So we'll say json.marshal, the book that we received from our database function, right? Now that needs to be converted into JSON. So, and now we'll start creating our header, and we'll set our header content type comma pkg application slash JSON w dot write header http dot status OK w dot write, and we'll send the response. The last three steps are the same for almost all functions. There's nothing new there. Now there's only one function left to go, which is obviously the people find it the most complicated function, which will be the update function, and it will have some aspects of all of the different functions that we have seen till now. It's also the biggest function. So update book is the biggest function, and let's get started. I mean, that's why I always cover the update function at the end, because it can be confusing to people. So that's why we have already seen delete book, create book, get book by ID, and it will just have a combination of all of these functions, right? So let's create the update book function where U is capital and B is capital, W http dot response writer comma R, which will be http dot request. Right, so all good till here, no confusions. So we have update book, which is of models dot book, very similar to our create book, right? The same code we're writing out here. Utils dot parse body. So whatever you've sent in your request as the new body to be updated into database for that same ID, that's what we're going to parse, and we're going to take from JSON into a we're going to unmarshal it into a format that Golang understands and the database understands. So that's what we have done here. Now we want to get our ID, which is vars is equal to mux dot vars. So like I said, it's a mixture of the post the create book function and the get by ID function, right? So book ID is equal to vars, and we get access to book ID. So till here we wrote some code from the create book function, And here we have started writing some code from the get book by ID function, right? The same thing, the same part we have to repeat here. So ID comma ARR. I'm not going to copy and paste it because I always encourage you to write everything so that you get very comfortable with the code, right? Parse int and book ID comma 0 comma 0, and if there is an error, which is error not equal to nil, then we're going to print out fmt.print ln say error while parsing, right? So completely the same till here, right? This whole part is exactly the same, and these two lines I guess showed you is the same from create book. So till now I think there's nothing confusing at all. So now let's get the book by ID, right? So we need to find that book, if that book even exists in our database, only then we'll update it, right? So let's find that book details db equal to models dot get book by ID, and we'll pass capital ID there. If update book dot name is not equal to empty string, it's not empty, then book details dot name is equal to update book dot name. Okay, so let me type all this out and then explain to you what all this means. And if update book dot author is not equal to empty, then book details dot author is equal to update book dot author, right? And then if update book dot publication is not equal to empty string, then book details dot publication is equal to update book dot publication. So in our book model, as you had seen, there are three things, right? Name, author, publication. So when we have to create a new book, right, then while creating that new book, you'll have to have these three fields: name, author, and publication. So we are assuming here in our controllers that the request that we'll get from the user, it will have all these three properties: name, author, and publication. So we'll take the request that we got from the user inside update book, and we have parsed it, right? So it should be utils dot, yeah, so this is a big mistake here that I've made. It should be utils dot parse body and not just parse. Make sure you update that as well, right? So let me check if everywhere else I have not made that, anywhere else I've not made that same mistake. Yeah, I've not. So it's parse body, utils dot parse body, and everything else looks to be all right. Okay, so we are assuming that update body after parsing has three things: name, author, and publication. So we found that body, so we found that book from inside the database using get book by ID function, because we have whenever we call the update function, we pass the ID and we pass the body, the new body with the new details which need to be set inside the database now. So we'll have name, author, and publication, and for book details, right, we need to start setting those three things. So now book details is something that we get from our models.getBook by ID. So get book by ID, by passing the ID, we get a book back in return, and now we are setting the details for that particular book object, right? So we said book details.name. Now that will become equal to the new name that we have sent as part of the request that we had also passed, right? And the author will also now become equal to the author of the update book, which is basically the request. Inside that we have passed an author, so that will become the new author. And similarly, the publication will also become the new publication. So all of that detail is now inside the book details record. which we now want to save in our database, right? So since we have updated it, now we want to just save it. So updating is taking place inside our Golang. It's not taking place anywhere else. So we just found it by ID. We now updated all the details, and we're just going to go ahead and save it again, right? So dot save book details. Now we want to send some response to our user. As you know, it has to be in JSON. So we're going to send the book details, which we just updated, right? So with the updated things, it's going to go to the user. So header and dot set content type, comma, pgkey slash JSON. Then with w dot write header http dot status OK, and w dot write response. So we've even sent the response to the user, and so we have written our update function, delete function, create book, get book by ID, and get books. So I think all of the work is complete. So now let me just go between all my files and see. So main.go file is complete, config file is complete, controller is complete, models are complete, routes are complete, and utils are complete. So all of this makes sense, and now it's time to start testing and start fixing if we get any errors or bugs, and also to check how to work with of these APIs in our Postman. So let's head over to Postman. So we are back in our terminal because now we want to start trying to run that code that we have written, the entire bookstore API. So as you can see, I'm inside my Google Bookstore folder, right? And it has CMDN package. You can see that. I want to go inside my CMD package, and it has a main folder. So I want to go inside my main folder. This has that main.go file. Now main.go file is the file that we need to be able to run the go build command. If you run the go build command anywhere else, it won't run because it needs the main.go file. Now when you run go space build, I'm expecting to see a lot of errors, right? And you don't have to worry if you see the errors, because that's a part and parcel of being a developer. So you will have to get used to solving those errors that you get. So as soon as I press go build, it's going to give me some errors. So right now it's giving me only one error, but once I solve this error, I know there will be many more errors, right? So right now it's saying that in book.go file at line number 11, it cannot refer gone.model. So I kind of know where the error is. Now I'm not going to edit all of this out. You're going to solve the errors with me so that you become better as a developer. So you can identify. So it's saying book.go file, and at line number 11 it's going to say gone.model is not there. So all I had to do was put a capital M here, and now it won't give me the same error again, or so I expect. So if I say go build again, it's giving me, like I told you, so this error is sorted, but it's just given me so many more errors, right? So the first error it's saying is it cannot refer to unexported name mux.vars. So let's head over to line number 47 in our Go book controller. Line number 47. Yeah, so vars has to be capital V, right? So that's why it's not able to access. So we'll say capital V, and that error should at least go away, right? So this error will go away. And then it says label book ID defined and not used, which is line number 64. So yes, it's saying defined but not used because I missed the is equal to sign here. And I have a feeling that all of the other errors, because they are much later into this same function, so till line 80, till line number 80, from 65 to 80, I'm seeing all these errors, and I have a feeling that they're all because of this is equal to sign that I'd missed. So now I'm going to go ahead and go build again, and let's see if there are any more errors. Yeah, so there are more errors. It's saying go 71.3 undefined book details. So let's find out. So these errors are on line 71, 74, 77, and 79 and 80. Let's look into the code. What could be the issue here? So 71, 74, and all of these lines. And the error basically saying that book details is not defined. So I can see here that I've written books by mistake and not book details. So once I fix that, I remove that extra S, hopefully these errors should go away, and there could be more errors. No, so there are no new errors. When I ran go build, there were no new errors, and it created this main file here for me. And now I can start to run this code, and I can start showing you from Postman. So you can say go run main dot go. It won't say anything. That means that it's started running on your Postman. So now let's head over to our Postman, and I'll show you how to work with each of these APIs that we. I've opened up my Postman window. So Postman is a tool that helps us to test all the APIs. If you don't know what Postman is, you can go ahead and watch any video from YouTube. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a collection here, and I'm going to call it bookstore. My server is still running. So inside my bookstore collection, I have to create a request, and I'll call it get all. All right. And then I have a request called create. Then I have get by ID. I'll have update, and finally I'll have delete. So for get all, I need localhost 9010 where this project is running, and slash book slash. Okay, and if I get all, I get an empty array, and if this is what you get, then your server is working perfectly fine. You're getting the right result, because right now we don't have any books, so we get an empty array, right? And so that's why if we don't have any books, we have to create the book in the first place. So we'll create the book using the post or create, right? So we'll say book slash, and then we'll use the post method. We'll send some body. Now remember, in the body you have to send JSON, and JSON will have 3 fields. One is name, the other is author, and the third is make sure you get the spellings of author and name and publication right. Third is publication. So name of the book is 0 to 1, and author is Peter Thiel. Publication is Penguin, I think. So you send it, and you get a response, which basically shows us that everything is fine. And we get status 200 OK, which we have only sent. We wrote it right in the code. That is that header, status OK. And let's create another book. Let's call it The Startup Way by Eric Rise. And I don't know what the name of the publication is. So I've created 2 different books. By the way, both of these books are amazing. If you're planning to start your own company, I highly recommend you read these books. And so when we run the get all API again, it works perfectly fine, right? We get both the books that are there in our database. And now let's get by ID. So we have one book with ID 3, and we get that 0 to 1, and one book with ID 4, and we get that as well. Perfect. Now we'll update the book by which has the ID 4, and for the body I'm going to again select raw JSON, and I'm going to simply copy and paste this here, and let's change the publication to Orion. So it's updated the book, and now the publication should have been Orion. Oh, sorry, I have to write put here. The publication will become Orion, right? So don't forget to change the methods here, right? And for create, the method was post, and for update it is put, right? I hope that makes sense. Now we can go ahead and delete this book, and for that I'll need the delete method in my Postman. So when I send that, the the book is gone, hopefully. So now there's only one book remaining, which has an ID 3, which is basically 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel. So all our 5 APIs working perfectly fine. And if you've completed this video and you have been able to code out till this far, congratulations. And I'll be creating more videos in the upcoming days, and those videos will be even more complicated than this, in the sense we'll create some videos using Go Fiber, and then we'll create some videos with Golang and Postgres. We'll create another CRUD, and then we'll start creating authentication. So I have an interesting video planned out where I'll show you how you can also use CSRF tokens along with JWT tokens. So it'll be highly secure, how to build like a very highly secure Golang app. And then we'll start looking into Golang microservices, and then I'll start showing you some really advanced Golang project structures where like with full-blown infra architectures, like you'll have Docker and Kubernetes and Grafana and Prometheus for monitoring. All of those things will be there. So not only will you build microservices, but you'll build highly scalable and monitorable, really resilient microservices. So if you want to keep viewing all this kind of stuff, then do subscribe. That's the kind of content I have planned out for this channel. And thanks a lot for watching, and like I said, do subscribe, and I hope you learned a lot from this.